As I mentioned, Madam Chair, I'd like to first talk on 4A briefly and then on 4B. In relation to implementation of the Declaration at the national and regional level, FAIRA considers that implementation of human rights, ensuring that our communities are able to take charge of the changes, should be pursued using the Durban Programme of Action and the Programme of Action of the second decade of the world's Indigenous peoples. The Durban Programme of Action calls upon states, amongst other things, to take, and I quote, administrative, legislative, judicial and all necessary measures to promote, protect and ensure the enjoyment by Indigenous peoples of their rights, end quote. The Programme of Action recommends that states examine, in conformity with relevant international human rights instruments, norms and standards, their constitutions, laws, legal systems and policies in order to identify and eradicate racism and related intolerance towards Indigenous peoples. The Programme of Action proposed Indigenous peoples have full and free participation in all areas of society, in particular in matters affecting or concerning their interests, and recommends that states promote understanding amongst society at large of the importance of special measures to overcome disadvantages faced by Indigenous peoples, and to consult Indigenous representatives in the process of decision making and concerning policies and measures that directly affect them. Madam Chairperson, in these two areas alone, they are extremely important steps to be taken to implement the rights at national levels. They are unambiguous and fundamental to any positive response to the Declaration. They are areas where states can easily take stock of their current status and level of compliance with international human rights standards. If we look at the Programme of Action for the second decade of the world's Indigenous peoples, and this is adopted by the General Assembly, we can see that there are very similar calls for actions by the states. The expert mechanism and the Human Rights Council should be giving close attention to these programs of action and the efforts made by the states. In relation to the full and free participation of Indigenous peoples in all areas of societies, the second decade Programme of Action has quite clear provisions for participation of Indigenous peoples. It says the key to the implementation of the Programme of Action is the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples. And it is recommended that Indigenous organisations should establish committees at the national and local level to monitor implementation of the Programme of Action, and that governments should establish national focal points on Indigenous issues and on the second decade, and intensify coordination and communication at the national level among relevant ministries, agencies and local authorities. So on this point on 4A, FAIRA recommends that the High Commissioner for Human Rights encourage the human rights treaty bodies to focus and bring attention to these matters and assess the merits of the actions being undertaken by states. Secondly, FAIRA recommends that the expert mechanism provide recommendations on how the universal periodic review process established by the Human Rights Council might be used to identify the achievements at the national levels in meeting the rights of Indigenous peoples, particularly in those key areas that we have identified in this presentation.